Have you ever really, truly trusted your senses? And I don't mean just, glancing at something and moving on.
hmm
I mean, you walk outside, your feet feel a totally solid, stationary ground.
Right. You look out at the horizon at the beach, and it just looks like a perfectly flat line.
Exactly. But then almost instantly, your brain just overrides that input. You remember the textbook. You remember that little globe sitting in the corner of your third-grade classroom.
And you tell yourself, no, I'm actually spinning at 1,000 miles an hour on a giant ball. It creates this really distinct form of cognitive dissonance, where we prioritize the learned theory over our immediate lived experience.
Yeah, we trust the model more than the measurement. And today, we are leaning hard into that lived experience. Welcome to today's deep dive. We're unpacking a stack of sources that don't just question the standard model of the Earth, they completely dismantle it.
And they don't do it with, greeny conspiracy photos either. The authors use geometry, military radar mechanics, and DIY physics experiments that you can literally do in your kitchen.
With a water bottle. It's wild. So our mission today is to walk through the logic presented in two very specific archives. We've got the Globe Terminator documents, and then the experimental video logs of level-headed William.
And a quick heads up for everyone listening, we are not here to tell you what to believe. We aren't taking sides in this debate at all.
Right. Our job is just to report on the physics and the logic presented in these documents. And honestly, even if you are a diehard skeptic, the logic here is surprisingly rigorous. It forces you to actually think about why you believe what you believe.
It really does. So we're going to tackle this in two distinct phases, just mirroring our sources. First, we'll look at the Globe Terminator data, which uses geometry and observation to argue that the Earth is geometrically flat and exists within a pressurized container.
And then, and this is the part that actually made me stop and rewind my notes, we're going to pivot to level-headed William. Because his experiments argue that this flat, contained system isn't just sitting there in space.
Right, it's effectively an engine. It is in a state of continuous upward acceleration.
It totally changes the model from a static floor to a dynamic vehicle.
Yeah.
So let's get right into it. Let's start with the ground beneath our feet. Or, well, specifically the salt.
Ah, yes, the Bolivian salt flats. The Salar de Uyuni.
I had to look this up while I was going through the notes. It is massive, over 9,000 square kilometers. I mean, it's roughly the size of some small countries, just this vast expanse of white salt.
It's the largest salt flat on Earth. And this is exactly where the Globe Terminator source introduces what they call the law of non-contradiction. The argument is geometrically pretty simple, but the implications are huge.
Walk us through it.
Okay, so if the Earth is a sphere with a radius of 3,959 miles, which is the standard heliocentric model, there is a strict, non-negotiable curvature formula.
This is the drop calculation we always hear about, right?
Correct. It's just Pythagorean geometry applied to a sphere. On a ball of that specific size, over a distance of, say, 100 kilometers, which is about 62 miles, the surface shouldn't just be flat. It has to curve downward significantly. The source calculates that you should see a vertical drop of 781 meters.
Let's just visualize that for a second. 781 meters. That is nearly exactly the height of the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, the tallest building in the world.
It's an enormous curve. If you started at one end of that 100-kilometer stretch and looked across with a telescope, the other end should be buried under nearly a kilometer of Earth.
But the source cites a topographic study of the Salar de Uyuni. And what does the study actually say about the shape of the salt?
It states that across this entire 9,000 square kilometer area, the vertical relief, so the difference in height between the highest and lowest point, is less than 1 meter.
Okay, so the math demands a drop the size of the Burj Khalifa. But the actual measurement shows a drop of, what, a coffee table?
Exactly. That is the contradiction. The source argues you cannot have a geometric flat plane and a sphere at the exact same time. The author uses a philosophical term here, actually. He says believing you can have both is like believing in married bachelors.
Married bachelors. It's a logical impossibility. You just can't be a flat curve.
Precisely. The source argues that since the salt flats are measurably, demonstrably flat, the sphere model totally violates the law of non-contradiction. It effectively claims the globe model is a mathematical impossibility when confronted with this topographic data.
So if the model says curve and the ground says flat, the source says you have to trust the ground.
Right. But they don't stop at the ground. They go right after aviation, too.
Yeah, the flight document. That was one of those things that once you hear it, you really can't unhear it the next time you're sitting on a plane.
It addresses the vertical drop issue, but from a pilot's perspective. Think about it. If you are cruising at 500 miles per hour and the Earth is curving away from you constantly, you literally can't fly in a straight line.
Because if you flew in a perfectly straight line, you'd eventually fly right off into space. The Earth is dropping away beneath you.
Exactly. You would have to constantly nose down to track the curve.
Like physically push the stick forward the entire flight.
The source actually does the math on that descent rate. To maintain a constant altitude above a curving Earth at 500 miles per hour, a pilot would need to descend, physically pitch the nose down, approximately 2,789 feet per minute.
Nearly 3,000 feet a minute.
Yeah.
That is not a gentle drift. That's a roller coaster drop. I mean, that's an emergency descent rate in some contexts.
It's a highly aggressive maneuver. And the source points out that passengers and pilots simply don't experience this. Commercial planes fly level. The artificial horizon on the dashboard stays totally level.
They aren't performing what the source, I think, sarcastically calls barrel rolls or the hokey pokey to compensate for the curvature.
Yeah.
They just fly level.
Which implies they're flying over a flat surface. If you fly level and maintain your altitude, the ground below you has to be flat.
That's their conclusion.
Yeah.
And this idea extends over to military technology as well, right? The source spends a good chunk of time analyzing the ESSM, the Evolved Sea Sparrow missile.
Yes, the naval radar section. It gets pretty technical, but the core of it is all about line of sight.
Right.
These missiles use a semi-active seeker. They require a target illumination radar from the ship to basically paint the target with a radio frequency beam. And the key constraint here is that radar travels in straight lines. It requires a direct line of sight.
So the ship has to essentially see the target with the beam.
Yeah.
In order to hit it. The beam can't curve around the Earth.
Correct. Now, the source notes that these missiles are combat effective at ranges of over 35 miles. They hit sea-skimming targets, like other ships or low-flying missiles, at that distance.
Okay.
Now, apply that curvature math we talked about earlier. At 35 miles, the curvature of the Earth should create a physical hump of water between the ship and the target.
How big of a hump are we talking about?
The calculation shows the target should be hidden behind 463 feet of curvature.
463 feet. That is a 40-story building made of water blocking the view.
A literal wall of water.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, the radar works. The missile hits the target.
So if the radar beam is straight and it hits a target 35 miles away, that mathematically should be behind a wall of water.
Then the wall of water does not exist. The surface is flat. The source argues this isn't just an observation, it is a definitive proof based on the functional specifications of multi-million-dollar military hardware. They're basically saying the military knows the Earth is flat because they build weapons that only work on a flat Earth.
Man, that's intense. Now, there was one more geometric proof in there that felt very old school to me. The sextant. I haven't seen one of those outside of a maritime museum, but apparently they are the smoking gun for this argument.
It's all about how the instrument is fundamentally defined. A sextant measures elevation angles. It measures the angle between a celestial body like a star or the sun and the horizon.
Okay.
The source emphasizes that to measure an elevation angle, you mathematically require a perfectly horizontal baseline.
Help me out here. Why can't you have a horizontal baseline on a ball?
Because on a sphere, you don't have planes, you have tangents. A tangent is a line that touches a curve at one single solitary point. If you move even 1 mile, your tangent changes. It is not a consistent baseline.
Ah, I see.
The source argues that since sextants function by measuring angles against the horizon, they are mathematically relying on flat plane geometry. If the Earth were a ball, the geometry of a sextant simply wouldn't work as intended. You would never get an accurate fix because your baseline would be constantly curving away from you.
So if we sum up the Globe Terminator case so far, the salt flats are too flat, planes don't nose down, radar sees straight through where the curve should be, and navigation tools require a flat baseline. Therefore, the Earth is flat.
Geometrically, yes, that is their firm position. But that leads to the immediate obvious problem. If the Earth is flat, what happens at the edge? And what about space?
Right, which brings us to the container theory. Because usually when we think of flat Earth, people imagine a disk floating out in space, but this source says that's impossible.
Completely impossible because of thermodynamics. The source poses a really simple question. How can we have atmospheric gas pressure here on Earth existing right next to the absolute vacuum of outer space without a physical barrier?
Yeah, usually when you open a pressurized tank, the gas just rushes out. It desperately wants to equalize.
That's the antecedent and consequent logic the source uses. Gas pressure is the consequent, it's the result. The container is the antecedent, the necessary cause. The source argues that gases naturally expand to fill their available volume. That is just the second law of thermodynamics regarding entropy.
So if space is a vacuum and Earth has high pressure, the atmosphere should just gone, just burst into the void instantly.
Unless there is a container. The source argues that just as you cannot have tire pressure without a physical tire, you cannot have atmospheric pressure without an atmospheric container. Therefore, because we have air pressure that we can breathe, we must be living inside a sealed system. We are not on a ball in a vacuum. We are in a pressurized room.
A pressurized room. That changes the picture entirely. It's not a planet, it's a habitat.
And the source argues this habitat is totally stationary. It aggressively attacks the idea of the Earth spinning using the Coriolis effect and commercial flight times.
Oh, this was the Charlotte to LA argument. I love this part.
Yes. The source argues that if the Earth is actually spinning east at roughly 860 miles per hour at that latitude, a plane flying west should get to its destination much, much faster, because the destination is literally spinning towards the plane.
The math they used was incredibly stark. They claimed a flight from Charlotte to LA should take an hour and a half if the Earth spins, instead of the usual 4.5 hours.
And since it always takes 4.5 hours, which is the exact same time it takes to fly back, they conclude the Earth isn't spinning beneath the plane. Now, the standard scientific counter-argument to this is that the atmosphere spins with the Earth.
Right. Conservation of momentum. Everything just moves together.
But the Globe Terminator source mocks this relentlessly. The author asks, how exactly is the air attached to the ground? Is it Velcroed? Is it superglued?
Velcro to the ground. I really like that visual.
The source emphasizes that gas molecules move freely and randomly. They aren't tethered to anything. So the idea that the entire atmosphere is spinning in perfect lockstep with the solid Earth is, according to the source, a massive violation of fluid dynamics.
Okay, so let's just pause and look at the model we've built up to this point. We have a geometrically flat, stationary floor. We have a dome or a container keeping the pressurized air in. It sounds very solid. But, and here is the huge glaring question, if we aren't a ball with gravity pulling everything to the center, why do things fall down? Why am I sitting in this chair right now and not just floating around the studio?
And that is the perfect pivot to our second set of sources, level-headed William. This is where the model shifts from static to incredibly dynamic, because William argues that the Earth is not a motionless plane.
Yeah, this is where it gets really sci-fi for me. Because William argues that the reason we feel gravity is not because mass attracts mass.
No, he suggests that the entire system, the flat floor and its dome container, is accelerating upwards.
Okay, let's break down the experiments that led him there. Because he doesn't just make this claim, he tries to literally prove it with a smartphone.
A simple digital accelerometer on a phone. When you have the phone resting flat on the table, what does the app read?
It reads 1G. 1G force.
Exactly. And the source points out that an accelerometer measures acceleration. Not gravity as some mystical pulling force, but physical mechanical acceleration. If it's reading 1G while sitting still, it means it is actively being pushed. The source argues that the Earth is mechanically pushing up against the phone.
But then he drops the phone. The free fall experiment.
This is crucial. When he drops the phone, the reading instantly goes to 0. 0G.
Which implies there is no force acting on it.
According to the source, yes. When the object is in free fall, it is no longer in contact with the Earth's upward push. The source interprets gravity not as a force pulling you down, but as the Earth simply catching up to you. When you let go of the phone, it is momentarily suspended in space, and the floor rushes up to meet it.
Whoa, so falling is actually just standing perfectly still while the floor slams into you.
That is the direct implication of the universal acceleration model. And level-headed William uses a series of buoyancy experiments to prove this is mechanical acceleration. The van experiment is the one that really visualizes this perfectly.
Right, he have a helium balloon inside a closed van.
Think about what happens when you hit the gas in a regular car. You get pushed back into your seat, right?
Right, you feel the G-force pushing you back.
The air inside the van does the exact same thing. Air is heavy, relatively speaking, so it rushes to the back of the van. This creates a pressure gradient. You get high pressure clustered at the back and lower pressure at the front.
And since helium is lighter than the surrounding air,
It seeks the low pressure, it moves forward. When the van accelerates forward, the balloon magically moves forward.
it goes against the acceleration.
Exactly. The source argues that buoyancy, things floating or rising, absolutely requires a pressure gradient. And that pressure gradient is uniquely created by acceleration. Without acceleration, there is no heavy direction for the air to settle into.
So without acceleration, there's no up or down for the balloon to navigate.
That's exactly what the water bottle experiment attempts to prove. William takes a standard plastic water bottle and drills holes vertically along the side.
And obviously water spurts out the holes.
Mhm.
The bottom hole spurts the furthest because there's more weight of the water pressing down on it.
Correct. But, and here is the aha moment for the source, he drops the bottle. He puts it into free fall.
And the water totally stops.
The jets of water vanish instantly.
I actually watched the video of this while prepping. It is really weird to see. It looks like the video is paused, but the bottle is clearly falling. The water just sits there perfectly still inside the bottle.
The source argues this proves that pressure gradients and buoyancy vanish entirely in free fall. If gravity were an independent force actively pulling the water down, it should still be pulling the water out of those holes even while the bottle falls. But because the water stops flowing the millisecond you drop it, the source concludes that the pressure was only there because the Earth was pushing up against the water.
You remove the push by dropping it,
Yeah.
and you completely remove the pressure.
Exactly. It redefines weight not as an intrinsic property of mass, but as a temporary symptom of acceleration. You only have weight because the floor is actively hitting you.
So let's try to connect all these dots together. We have the globe terminator saying the geometry is a flat floor and the system is sealed in a container. And we have level-headed William saying the only reason we have weight is because this entire container is moving up.
It forms a cohesive, albeit radically alternative, worldview. Synthesizing this into a single image is really what pulls both source archives together.
It's the flame visualization that really stuck with me in this section.
Yes, the candle. William shows a standard candle flame. On Earth, sitting on a table, the flame points sharply up. Why?
Because heat rises, right?
But why does heat rise? Because the cold ambient air is denser and pushes down, forcing the lighter hot air up. It's a density sort. But as we just learned from the van experiment, you need acceleration to sort density.
So when he drops the candle.
The flame becomes a perfect sphere. It doesn't point up anymore. It just becomes a round ball of fire. There is no up without the Earth's mechanical acceleration to define it.
That is just, it's a lot to process.
Right.
So the ultimate argument from combining these sources is we live on a geometrically flat floor inside a pressurized dome, and this entire massive structure is blasting upwards through space effectively forever.
To overcome constant motion, you need constant acceleration. That is the fundamental physics principle they are relying on. They argue this model entirely removes the need for magical forces, like a gravity that somehow pulls from the center of mass. Instead, they replace it with purely mechanical contact forces. You feel heavy strictly because the floor is hitting you.
It effectively turns the Earth into a spaceship, a massive, flat, pressurized spaceship.
In a way, yes. A contained system equipped with an engine.
And that naturally leads to the biggest question of all, doesn't it? If we are accelerating upwards constantly at 32 feet per second squared, what in the world is powering it?
The sources allude to this, particularly in the Globe Terminator material where they reference proofs of a creator. The strong implication is that such a perfectly balanced system, a flat, pressurized, accelerating container, isn't a cosmic accident. It is an engineered construct.
It definitely implies a builder, a designer of some kind. You don't get a pressurized cabin with an infinite engine just by random chance.
But strictly sticking to the observable physics presented in our deep dive today, the synthesis of these sources is that we are looking at a system that defies the heliocentric model not just in shape, but in pure mechanics. The Globe Terminator provides the static architecture, the flat floor, the dome. Level-headed William provides the engine, the upward acceleration that simulates what we call gravity.
And what I find so interesting about all this is how much they rely on things you can actually go out and do yourself. Like you can drill holes in a water bottle and drop it in your backyard. You can watch a flame in free fall.
That is the core appeal that the authors emphasize. Trust your senses. The sources argue that we have been rigorously trained to ignore our sensory input. We're trained to ignore that the horizon looks perfectly flat and the ground feels perfectly still, all in favor of an abstract theoretical model. They are inviting you, the listener, to return to raw observation, to be a true empiricist.
It's a call to not just accept gravity as a vocabulary word, but to test if it actually acts like a pulling force or a pushing acceleration.
And that brings us to the ultimate takeaway. Why does this matter? The authors emphasize that this shift removes invisible magical forces and replaces them with mechanical, testable physics. It makes the world understandable, touchable, and verifiable by anyone.
It also completely changes your place in the universe. You aren't just a random speck of dust spinning in an infinite, chaotic void. You are in a highly controlled environment.
A controlled, pressurized, and uniquely powered environment.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we are left with a pretty provocative picture. A salt flat in Bolivia that completely defies mathematical curvature. A military radar system that sees straight through literal walls of water. And a water bottle that magically stops leaking the second you drop it.
It is an incredible amount of data to digest, and it challenges the very foundation of how we perceive our physical reality.
I think these sources leave us with a final lingering thought. If the Earth creates the effect of gravity by constantly moving upwards, and it's been doing this for as long as humanity has existed.
But then what is the ultimate fuel source? If the Earth is a machine, a contained engine accelerating endlessly through the void, what is driving it? And what exactly exists outside the container that we're moving through?
That is definitely a question for another deep dive.
Indeed it is.
For now, we encourage you, don't just take our word for it, and don't just take the textbook's word for it either. Look at the horizon, drop a water bottle. See what you find for yourself.
Critical thinking is, after all, about questioning the fundamental assumptions we take for granted every day.
Thanks for joining us for the deep dive. Keep questioning.
Until next time.